I was minding my own business, researching 3 to 4 series because, that's what I do now. And I realized something slightly disturbing, more disturbing than the stuff I've been researching. I know. And I'm going to ask you this question. Do you know where the term to sell someone down the river, have you heard of it? Do you know what it means? It means to throw somebody under the bus, to betray someone or do something in order to gain advantage for yourself, i.e., she was thrown under the bus or sold down the river by the people who were supposed to protect her. Yeah. I just realized where that term came from. You see, I was randomly reading a dissertation called Black Girlhood and the Birth of Black Woman by Adwoa Defi Antwi, and it used the phrase to be sold down the river, and it literally smacked me in the middle of my forehead when I realized where it came from. Now, to make sure that I wasn't crazy, I did some digging to make sure, and I'm not crazy. The saying dates back to the mid-1800s, and what was happening in the mid-1800s? Do you remember? Did somebody say slavery? Because you would be correct. The saying, to be sold down the river, comes from northern enslavers threatening to sell enslaved people down the river to ensure compliant behavior from enslaved people. The enslaved people who were considered difficult would be separated from their families, removed from everyone they'd ever known, and shipped down the Mississippi River to carry out brutally hard labor to work as laborers on cotton plantations in the Deep South. Yes, enslavers from Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, and even New Jersey would send difficult enslaved people down the river when they became too much, when they became what was perceived as too difficult. Journalist Lee Sandiland said the threat of being sold down the river was seen as tantamount to a death sentence. These people were usually never seen or heard from again. To be sold down the river was one of the most dreaded prospects of the enslaved population. Not being separated from their families, not being whipped, being sold down the river to the Deep South to work on cotton plantations. Sociologist Wilma A. Dunaway has written that the global demand for cotton set off a forced migration of enslaved people, with close to 1 million being transported to the Deep South between 1790 and 1860. The importation of enslaved people ended by 1808, and that's the transatlantic slave trade. Domestic slave trade didn't end. And that means much of the demand for labor was met by selling enslaved people who were born in one of the so-called slave-growing states, such as Kentucky. We talked about this. Maryland and Virginia were two such states called slave-growing states. They forced the breeding of black women and then sold enslaved children down the river.